Hello. Welcome back to another episode of Yarns for the Soul with Nicole. Thank you so much for joining me again. It's been a pleasure to bring you so many juicy yarns so far, with many more to come. If you're enjoying the content, I would love if you can rate and review the podcast on whatever platform you're listening to me on, and jump in on Instagram. You can find me at Yarns for the Soul, bringing you all of the info over there. So today I am joined by an extra special guest. My older sister Hannah will be joining me. We yarn about all things grief and sharing some of our own experiences from our grief journeys, jumping into some of the thoughts and emotions and feelings that you feel like you're not supposed to have, or society tells you that you shouldn't be having. So I think this is a really juicy chat, delving into some of that. And Hannah's own story looks like one that goes from working as an engineer full-time and an endurance athlete in her spare time to now being a grief coach based in the beautiful Manapori. So part of what we talk about today is Hannah's experience with the physical manifestations of grief, and how grief really shifted her perspective and ability to move her body, and how that changed how she lived her life. I'm so excited to get into all of that. Just a note though, obviously we talk about grief and death in this episode, so while it's not super heavy, if you're not in the right headspace for this content today, just be mindful of that. So thank you so much for being here, and let's get ready for some more yarns. Hello, so I have a extra special guest today. My sister Hannah is joining us. Welcome.
Hello. Good afternoon.
Thank you so much. I feel like this could go in some interesting directions. So be prepared for anything that might come up. So Hannah is now an amazing grief coach, of all things, past life as a engineer, endurance athlete, amongst other things. But you recently did another podcast with Harriet Bremner. Was it the Raw Truth podcast?
Correct.
Yeah. And that gives a really awesome overview of kind of your backstory as much as possible. So if people want to dive in and listen to in a bit more detail, they can head over there. But if possible, give us some of your backstory in a shorter form.
Well, firstly, I really want to say thank you for having me on. It's really nice to be able to contribute and help in a small way to the work that you're doing for yourself and a little patch of the world too.
Yes, and today we get to share a similar patch of the world.
Yeah.
What's the same with you, all of the work that you're doing in this space as a grief coach and building on all of your experiences? So being able to share that and your story with the world is also so powerful.
Thank you. So yeah, I guess it's not until I sat down to try and write about it last year that I realized how much meat there was in my story. I kind of just thought, I've been through some tough stuff and come out the other side and that's all fine. But
yeah,
when you sit down to be with it and acknowledge and give space to everything and all the experiences that came around and after, and even leading up to it as well, all play into the story. So yeah, I guess my interview with Harriet gives the timeline and details around how that all happened, but that was 90 minutes long.
There's lots of good detail in there, lots of juicy stuff.
So I'll try to put it into a very brief form for you today.
Yeah.
So in 2018, pretty sure that's right.
I think so. Yeah, I lose track of time too, so it's fine.
I guess where it all started in terms of the journey with grief is that when our dad was diagnosed with cancer, I can't exactly remember which month that it was,
No.
April, May, early-ish part of 2018. And then later in the year, in October, my best friend, Caleb, like at that point, the only person that I felt like I could trust or who could really hold big emotions or I could even try to be vulnerable with, he was killed in an accident in the mountains. And actually that accident was only a week after we'd found out that Dad's prognosis was now terminal.
Mm-hmm.
So there was that kind of like a bit of a pressure cooker is one way to put it, but I've also thought about it as like, you know, you're standing on this little island in the middle of a river that's, you know, like it's pouring with rain and the floodwaters are rising, and like that was like when like the only piece of like solid or stable ground I had to stand on was like completely washed away. And then of course there was this, so with Caleb's death, there was still the like processing that and learning to live in that new version of reality, but also facing, you know, Dad's upcoming death as well, and not knowing on what timeline that was supposed to happen. And when he did pass away in the middle of January 2019, I've kind of thought of that as like this abyss, and there was just like I fell into it, and I think that point, like I kind of learned a little bit through grieving Caleb's death, is like there was no way that I can control it. So I was just like, here I am, like I'm going into the darkness, and I'm not sure quite what to do or how I'm going to come out of that. And I guess the last piece of like I kind of sometimes describe it as the deaths of my three wise men, like the three men that were really important in my life from a really, obviously since I was born.
Yeah.
And prior to that too. From basically my whole life until I was 30, there's just strong like men that I could look up to and respect, and kind of a really good example of a gentleman and a really positive masculine influence in my life. And so that triple whammy was kind of completed in, was it June, like Queen's birthday weekend in 2019 when Granddad died, so Dad's father. And us girls, well, you, me and Mum were away
yes, on a girls trip.
A getaway to
a holiday.
Have a holiday to, you know, like just have a break from all of this. And after the first night or two, we got the call that Granddad had died. I mean, not that it was unexpected. He was 91, right?
I think so. Yeah. Into his 90s.
Yeah. But you know, it's still, you can't really compare griefs, but it was still really dislocating, disorientating, just unsettling and different, and really it just really consolidated like that life has changed. Like my life has changed, and things are going to be really different from here on out.
Yeah, it's it's an interesting idea. Like obviously you can't compare griefs and everyone experiences it so differently, but from your experience is also completely different from mine, having three really strong people in your life within such a short period of time, and then trying to process the like upcoming loss of Dad and then having one of the only people that you've like confided in, like that's just unimaginable. Like having a family member die on its own is bad enough, So what you went through is just like the next level, unimaginable. But it's interesting that you sort of said that, I guess, the process that you went through a little bit, starting to grieve Caleb, did that help to some extent when like we lost Dad and Granddad?
In some senses, yes. Yeah, like I guess I knew what I was in for. And I guess I had learned what didn't work in terms of coping. Not that my methods of coping were, the traditional unhealthy, like,
yeah,
unhealthy things that you'd think of. But at that time, the way that I had like a really strong sense of identity, but also like positive, I guess, again, confidence and feeling good about myself from the endurance athlete stuff. So even at that point, I was still training for this. I spoke about this with Harriet, but yeah, training for this 6-day, 450-kilometer mountain bike stage race that was 5 weeks after Caleb's death. And while at that point, there was just no question in my mind that I wasn't going to do it. Like it was kind of like going out and training while I was like willing and dragging myself, being like stubbornly dragging myself out of bed to go out and get on my bike. There was an element of coping in there and helping me get through it. But yeah, that race was the hardest thing, like endurance and physical wise, that I've ever done. And then after Dad's death, I was just like, I can't do that anymore. And yeah, kind of just made that decision in my mind. I was like, I actually really value my body and treasure my body, and I want to be able to do this adventuring and endurance and enjoying myself outside for a long, long time. And yeah, grief is like the catalyst for that tangent of my journey since.
Because I guess for you, like part of your normal life pre all of this looked like quite intense training and regular getting out there on the bike and running and all the crazy things that I know nothing about. So I guess in a way, like the training was some sort of normalcy maybe for trying to cope, or I guess not knowing what else to do or feeling like you don't have a choice. Like, of course I'm going to keep training because I don't know what else I'm going to do.
Yeah. Like, I have like it was quite at that point. It was when Caleb died, was like that was supposed to be like my biggest training weeks. So I'd be doing, back to like in the training world, you talk about like back to back. So doing like a big, say like on a weekend, doing a big day on a Saturday and then a big day on a Sunday, which would, for me, I was living in Christchurch at the time, would look like kind of just packing up my snacks and my water and putting my bike in the car and driving to Little River. And then I would just, 8 o'clock in the morning and just jump on my bike and ride kind of around the peninsula. So like there's like amazing riding. It's just beautiful on Banks Peninsula. But like every climb would be about an hour. So you'd like settle in to climb up for an hour.
What?
And then you go, which would take you to roughly the summit road. And then you'd either choose to drop over the other side and into like one of the bays, which are beautiful.
Yeah.
But it would mean climbing, you'd have to
climb back up
the same way. So actually in there and back was at least 2 hours of climbing, just going uphill.
Wow. I wonder if we like just briefly touch on your history as an endurance athlete, because I mean for you it probably seems quite normal, but for the rest of us and for me as well, I feel like I frequently tell people that, I used to, when you were competing, I was like, I'm not sure we're actually related.
Yeah, I remember saying that and I was like, should I be offended?
No, I think I was just, because it was just amazing how much you packed into like life. And at one point you were working like full time in an office job and training for all of these crazy things. And so I wonder if you want to just touch on like some of the different events and stuff that you did.
Where to start?
Oh yeah, exactly.
I guess it probably started after uni. Like I've been a team sports girl all the way through school. Like I hated cross country. I hated. Like I remember I was probably 15, and I mean I think I was just that's like, because living on a farm, you're generally pretty active, and I think I don't want to say I was like talented at running, but it's just naturally, or like through what we did for fun, like you just run a lot. And so when it came to cross country, kind
of just came naturally.
It
definitely did not for me, so I feel like
maybe I don't know. But I just hated that feeling of like the burn, or like pushing myself, or that feeling of wanting to throw up at the end of a race.
Doesn't most people?
Or like because there was this one girl when it would be, between me and her as to who would, like usually between me and her as to who would win, and I was like, I don't want to race her today. And so like I faked a sickie. I'm pretty sure Mum knew that I was faking, but she didn't push me to go. It just happened to be on cross country day.
Funny that. I probably did that too, to be fair.
But yeah, no, I love team sports. That was my jam for a long time. But then eventually, I guess in my mid-20s, kind of became disenchanted. Is that a word?
I think it is. I don't know if it's the right word, but it is a word.
Like it lost its allure for me. I guess because I was living out of town at that stage, and to travel in to training and games was like a 45-minute drive each way, and then you were having to rely on teammates to turn up, and some would turn up to a game hungover, and that's just how things go. But I was just like, I'm done with it. So I had a few friends that were into cycling and running, and I kind of always looked at, like, especially living in Christchurch, like there's so many active people, like they're everywhere. And I would look at people running around Hagley Park, and I'm like, they really look like they're enjoying themselves. Like, I want to be like that.
Okay.
So kind of like, and I just wanted this thing that I could do in my own time. I could do it, just from my back door. And so I started running just with this goal of like being able to run for an hour and enjoy it, like not feel like my lungs were going to explode. So that's kind of where it all started. And then I entered a short trail run as like an event to work towards. And I was like, okay, cool. And then the next year, like, started road cycling and mountain biking just on like really cheap secondhand bikes, and just went nuts, like entering every single event, like something every weekend. I was just like, didn't know what I was doing, but I was meeting some cool people, and I guess trying new things and finding that I really enjoyed it. And then eventually, like, I guess the coast to coast had always been on my list, but when it came to kayaking, and I didn't live very close to water, and the whole faff involved with training there, I was like, no, I'll wait for a bit. And so I started swimming, and there was another, like, I just don't know where the drive came from.
I don't know either. It's like just adding more things to your to-do list.
I guess, like, I've probably been, I don't know. I think I'd always wanted, like, once you get into it, you kind of meet people that are doing other things, and you're like, they can do it, I can do it too. And which is true. So this, like, triathlons became a thing. I did a half Ironman, and then the equivalent off-road, and found that I really enjoyed preferred the off-road version. And so, yeah, getting to the events that we did. So, Motor Tapu down in Wanaka, finishes in Arrowtown. But doing that race was kind of like a favourite for me. I'm not sure what it was, but yeah, the off-road ride there became a bit of a favourite. And after maybe 2 or 3 years of doing it, I qualified for a spot in the age group world champs in Hawaii, which was,
as you do,
which is like had been kind of a goal, but I was like, I don't feel ready for that. But I'd managed to get a spot, and so we went. And Mum and Dad came with me, and about a week over there, and raced the world champs, and it was just a really, really neat experience.
But what did that race actually involve, like distances and stuff?
I think it was slightly shorter than half Ironman distance. So maybe like a 2K swim, 1.5K swim in the ocean, which was just so warm and amazing.
Yeah. Compared to like
cold
Lake
water.
Wanaka.
And then perhaps a 30-kilometer mountain bike with like 1,000 meters climbing. But it was just like really muddy, but being in totally different terrain to what I've been used to. But my coach shared, like, biking was probably my weakest, and so over the New Zealand winter prior to the race in October, I spent all winter like doing hills on my bike and building strength, and so like bike went really, really well. And then I came out to the run, and it was 10K trail run just through rainforest, and come to finish, like you kind of come out along the beach for the last 500 meters and then onto this finish line on the green in front of some fancy hotel.
I just love the idea that you did this like crazy ass race in Hawaii, like of all places.
yeah. But no, it was like this was something I dreamed of but never really thought about actually being possible. So I guess that really motivated me to get stuck into doing coast to coast. Like, here's something else I've dreamed of doing that, yes, if I put in the right preparation and training, then I can be ready for that too.
So coming from all of this high energy background life, obviously all the wheels kind of not quite literally, figuratively came off when like grief just hit and kind of came to a bit of a standstill. I mean, obviously you said there's the bike race that you'd been training for that you kind of just had to do. But how did your, like, I guess the physical response of grief when it all hit, what was that like?
It's I don't think any words that will come out of my mouth will describe how, especially when you're someone that gets so much like confidence and motivation and enjoyment from feeling strong and moving your body and going on adventures, that when you're just so exhausted that like a 20-minute walk has you feeling like you want to nap for the rest of the day, like that was a really, like, on top of the grief, that was a big thing to get used to, and just to learn to adjust to that different pace. And I guess intuitively, I mean, I've learned since that, exercise is like our body's main way of closing our stress cycle. So when we get activated or triggered or kind of, what's the word, like notched up, revved up in a way that exercise is a way that we can kind of complete that. So I guess I was lacking that
Mm.
completion. Like there's parts of grief that, well, a lot of grief, it's a huge shock to the body, but also all the, I guess, like the tentacles and all the secondary and beyond effects and losses can be really stressful. So I guess I knew it was important to find a way to move it through my body somehow. And that's probably how I came into yin yoga. And whenever I was in town, or even if I like from home, I would just find yin yoga on YouTube and settle into that. And but especially when I was near a studio, there would be like, I'd look for the yin classes and be like, I'm going to them.
Yes.
Just like it was, and it must be quite strange to an outsider, and I probably haven't quite like fully joined all the dots, and not that I need to either. Like it's just, but the contrast between this, like go, needing every minute of every day, like full of something, to like really craving this yin and stillness and softness, it probably like set the foundations for my journey since then.
So did you find that did you miss the more endurance side of things, or you kind of there was a transformation in moving towards, no, I want yin, I want like slowness and calmness?
I think it was both.
Yeah.
I still really enjoyed spending time, like I obviously, like being outside was really important to a lot of who I am, but that came to look like long, slow walks rather than running for a day. Like I go and just walk for a day, or a short, once I could. But earlier on grief, it was much shorter walks, or just being outside, lying on the grass. But I guess that was balanced by the yin and learning to find that, like, relish in that stillness.
Because I think, as I kind of reflect back, there's just so many layers to it, because you're coming to grips with like a new reality altogether, but then there's kind of the sort of coping mechanisms or things that feel normal or comfortable. You don't have the energy to pursue those either. So it's like you've lost the person and you're grieving that, but then you don't actually have access to things that would help you either. And I remember just not sleeping for months afterwards. It's like all these kind of things that no one talks about, no one told you. And it wasn't until I think I sought out a grief counsellor in Auckland, and probably the most helpful thing that she did was she had like this brochure thing that she pulled out with all these emotions written on it, and she's kind of just like, if you feel any of these, that's okay. Like giving me kind of permission, or giving myself permission to feel those things, but also realizing that I wasn't going completely nuts, because there's so many different emotions that come up that you wouldn't necessarily expect. Like
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, how long into grief did you seek support from a grief counsellor?
It was probably a good few months.
See, as like that in itself, isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying you're crazy.
Sometimes.
But like we're just and it's partly my experience as well, is like we're so grief and our society and how we come to learn to just think that we're gonna fix it ourselves, or we'll get back to normal. And like as you say, like it was a few months before you thought, oh, maybe someone could help me with this.
Yeah, I feel like I have no memory of like how long I took off work. It was probably maybe a month
Mm.
from like going down to kind of say goodbye to Dad, and then he passed away, and then we sort of did the service and everything. Um, and then yeah, going back to work. I think also because like I was still fairly young, and I didn't have a lot of lived experience. I didn't really know what to. Well, no one really knows what to do in those situations. But it
Yeah.
was like no one else had given me permission to feel any particular way or do anything, and I didn't know how to give myself that permission. And
Mm.
there's sort of the initial stages where people are checking in or seeing how you're going, and then particularly after that drops off, you're like, oh well, no one's checking in, so I'm guessing that I should be okay now, because I didn't know what else to do.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
You've never experienced it before, and I didn't have like any probably confidence to like go to my bosses and say like this is what I need,
Yeah.
and also not knowing what I needed as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
But it's crazy thinking back and realizing that I just went straight back to work, kind of going through the motions,
Mm-hmm.
and somehow, I mean, probably not really functioning,
Yeah.
like still showing up to work every day,
Mm-hmm.
and the fact that like normal like bereavement leave is like 3 days.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like you're supposed to process the death. You're supposed to organize the funeral, welcome and chat to all the guests, like visitors that come and
Mhm.
share their condolences, and then integrate all of that and get back to work as though you're a fully functioning human.
I know. And yeah, I think back to it, and at the time, because like sort of just moved up to Auckland, like opposite end of the country when Dad was diagnosed. So I
Mm.
was sort of like, well, what do I do? Do I stay in this job? Do I move down? Do I take time off? I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But it was an interesting job, but because I was working in the office of the chief coroner, so like the weird like darkness of it all, that I was, when I went back to work, I was dealing with death every day,
I don't
and
know how you
like
did that.
I don't know how I did it either, but also like no one around me kind of picked up on that aspect either.
Mm.
Like none of my bosses or my colleagues were kind of like, should you be doing this? Because
Yeah.
were you working, you're working still part-time at that stage, was that right?
Yes, I
Yeah.
was. Yeah, part time based in Ashburton.
What was your experience with kind of like returning to work or having those conversations with your bosses?
I was. I realized that not everyone has this. They're not as fortunate, but I have a really great relationship with my boss, and he was great. But they and they say take as much time as you need, and you're like, well, how much time do I need? I'd much rather just curl into the fetal position and probably
For
not
about a year?
ever go back to work. Yeah,
Yeah, at least a year.
yeah. Um, yeah. And yeah, he was really great. But actually going back into the office, and like I just have these, and especially after Caleb's death too. I think I took a couple of weeks off because he was an ICU for kind of just under a week, and then I took the next week off, and then was back. But I just remember, actually, I tried working from home. That like, his life support was turned off on the Friday, and I tried to work from home on the Monday, and I just was like, right, got my laptop, got my cup of coffee, like I'm going to do some work and distract myself from the hellhole that I'm in. And I was just like staring out the window, crying into my cup, watching the clouds go by. I was like, just like, I know for some people going back to work and finding something, constructive is really supportive for them, but for me it was not. I literally couldn't get my brain to focus on one thing. Like doing basic tasks was like brain was just like, how did I do this before?
Did you was there a process where you were able to go back to work, or like a sort of time frame for when you felt like you were fully present back at work?
That's a good question. Yeah, not immediately, no. Yeah, probably not.
Yeah.
Like, is it long? Like,
it's all a bit of a blur, like for me as well, returning and then going through the motions, and I don't really remember a lot of actual work when I returned.
yeah, and just and it's really interesting. Like, people are so respectful and really kind, but also awkward. Like, there's this, they're like, "Oh, I'm sorry for your loss," and then actually someone else brought this like interesting behavior to my attention a couple of years ago. He had also experienced the loss, and he said to me, like, people, acquaintances or even friends or family that you don't know so well will say, they might meet you on the street or the supermarket or whatever and say, "Oh, I'm so sorry for your loss." And then it's like, they've done their bit. It's kind of like, it comes across as they've done their bit in sharing, done the awkward bit, and it's kind of left on you, the bereaved person, to pick up the reins in the conversation. It's like, where we're going to go next. Like, inside, you're like, I just want to share everything about how shit everything is right now, but that's not what the kind of conversation this person is here for. So I just say thank you, and how's the weather, or how things at home, or what have you been up to lately?
Yeah, that's definitely an aspect that I feel like no one really talks about, that side of things as well, because I feel like initially when we were kind of like organising Dad's memorial and all that stuff, I think I was just so tired that I was like, I don't care what I say. Like, you're just going to have to deal with it.
Yeah.
But then I think that kind of went away after I returned to work, and then kind of no one around me was asking. So I thought, oh, okay, I'm meant to be fine now. I'm meant to be back to normal. And I feel like we've had a few conversations about it where you end up censoring your own answers because you feel like they might be uncomfortable, or you don't know how to bring it up, or realizing if you actually answer honestly, like, you might just end up in a ball of tears, and you're like, oh, is that socially appropriate? I don't want to make them feel awkward. Oh no, I'm just not going to say anything.
Yeah. And like, there's so much I could say on that, but I guess that the two things that come out of that is that we always have the choice, and I think that's something that's really important in these conversations about how you interact, especially when you're like, maybe not fresh, but especially in those early months when you're seeing people again and like for the first time following the death. Is like, you have the choice about how much you share and what you share, who with, and at what time, and in what kind of situation. I think that's really important. You can choose who, what, why, where, how.
Yeah. Was there anything that, like, for people who are asking you, like, how you are or sorry for your loss, is there a better way of phrasing that, do you think? So that the onus doesn't kind of fall back on the griever?
It's not something I've thought too much about, actually. But maybe just saying, is there something about your person that you'd like to share, or something that you want to remember, or would you like me to take this conversation in another direction, or how do you feel about it? Do you want to talk about it, or would you prefer to move on to something else? Yeah, just taking that. I know, like, that's there was the other thing, is like things that you're not necessarily, people don't talk about or aren't shared so much, as like the work of being a griever, like as well as processing your loss. Like as you say, like you're having to filter what you say, filter your reactions and your emotions, and even just having someone in a conversation taking a wee bit of that work, from direct conversation, taking that can be such a relief.
Yeah, I think something for me as well, and I guess it depends on like your relationship with people and how much you share with them. But like friends who are probably aware of how I might be feeling even in like sort of months afterwards, and realizing that like for them, like talking about their dads might trigger a response for me, and just awareness around that, or even asking like, do you want to talk about it? And having that like openness, because that's another thing that I found is all of the small triggers everywhere, and all of the like probably all the emotions that you're not meant to talk about or society thinks you're not supposed to have is like just out and about, and or like hearing people talk about their dads or something's happening or with that person that you've lost in your own life. And then I would have quite a like dark response, like just kind of angry, and then it kind of goes back to like, why did this happen to me? Kind of that's sort of the root of all of those feelings. And it's hard because I'm like, well, it's not the other person's fault that they still have this person in their lives. I can't blame them. But I'm angry, but I can't really talk about it because that's probably not like socially acceptable, or it's hard when people haven't been through it. They're not going to get it on that same level. Yeah. Did you have similar experiences where there was stuff that came up that you're like, am I allowed to say this?
A few. There was one in particular when I was back at work probably in February, and like they normally had like Friday afternoon drinks, but I think this one was like the first kind of big catch up since some people take their summer, like their holiday leave, like end of January, early February, and kind of everyone was back, and some of the big bosses were joining us as well. And I found myself sat down next to one of them, and I think I can't remember. I think he perhaps had known that Dad had been sick or had been away quite a bit with this and that, and he was just like, making Friday evening drink conversation. He was like,
talking about grief is great Friday drink conversation.
And he was like, how was your summer? Oh, I heard your dad wasn't very well. How's he getting on? And I was like, I don't know how to explain how my summer was. Like, it started with Caleb's accident, and then
Did you give an honest answer or a blunt response?
I didn't talk about Caleb, but I did respond to his question about Dad and saying, he died. Not quite as bluntly, because I still have this hang up of like, wanting to be the good girl and making conversation palatable for, worried about how other people feel, that I would have softened it a wee bit.
Yeah, because even the like making it more palatable, I think, was it a podcast that you put me onto, but they talked about the idea of like the language we use and saying, oh, they passed away, or we lost them. Like,
so juicy.
I'd actually never really thought about it, and because I think we often use those two words or phrases that kind of softens the edges a little bit for other people, where the reality is like they died. But you often say like, oh, they like passed away, or we lost them, or they're gone. But it hit home so much, but it was actually kind of funny in like a really dark way, talking about the idea of lost. Like, we haven't lost them. Like, we know where they are. But it hadn't occurred to me how much that I was changing my own language just on like small things like that.
And that's actually that I try to be really intentional about the language I use around that, and I know I've said it a couple of times already in our conversation, like saying passed away, you know, to make it more palatable. But
yeah,
a lot of the time I'll talk about like experiencing the death or when they died rather than passed away. I think I still use semi often, but like saying we lost them is like that's entirely not true. Like we know what losing, you know, like we didn't lose, like not a toddler that went running around the wall, like we didn't lose them and they're not going to be found. We know exactly what's happened to them, so there's no really sugarcoating that. And I think and I do believe like the language, and the more and more I learn about everything and about like coming to this work from a trauma-informed lens as well, is that our language is so important, and just the way that we frame things can either give people permission or not to kind of experience or really be with those big feelings. When you talk about, you know, someone dies, that's, you know, it sounds really, what's the word? Like, I don't know, like abrupt or crass, but, you know, it's the truth. Yeah.
And I guess, it's part of the processing. I think I found that, like, being aware of the language that I was using, and, like, I was probably censoring it for my own benefit sometimes as well, because it was hard to be like, oh, like, this person is dead.
Yeah.
But then once you've kind of come to terms with it, and then it moves on to you're censoring it for other people. But actually, you know, this is a normal part of life, and we should be kind of talking about it more. So actually not censoring it. I was wondering if you have any suggestions for people listening that know someone that's lost someone.
Really?
And can't find them. Just knowing how to support a griever with all the work that you've done in your own experiences. Have you got any words of wisdom?
Yeah, I'll give a bit of a short backstory to this.
Yeah.
So it was after I'd survived the year of firsts. It was like one rainy day, and I was like, cool, like I've learned some shit, and I was just so adamant, like this needs to be out there. Like I didn't know any of this when I started, and I've kind of learned through experience and trial and error and being a curious person and wanting to learn and understand things. So I sat down and, you know, and actually turned it into a blog post about all these things like that I wish I'd known. And then I was like, like all these other things kept popping out of the woodwork of things people had done or said that were actually really supportive to me. So that blog's still on my website if people are interested in the full shebang.
Yeah.
But especially early on, like really early on, the number one thing I think of and was important in my experience was, especially for a close family member, is like go to the bloody funeral. Like, like funerals are like, yes, they're always going to be a pain in the ass time, and you're going to have to tackle like other commitments to go there. And no, like you don't want to go because that's sad.
Yeah,
you probably won't get to spend that much time with the person. It might be a quick hug and a hello, and maybe share a sandwich. But just like your presence there will never ever be forgotten.
That's so true. I hadn't really thought about that, but like I'm thinking back, especially there was people that showed up that I kind of didn't expect as well.
And some people have driven like 6 hours just for that. Yeah. Like no, not doing anything else on the way. They were there just for that, and that.
Yeah, and it's stuck in my brain. Like I'm not forgetting those people who were there.
Yeah, and it's just like this is like, it's a really, really strong signal to the bereaved person that it's like, you can trust this person that showed up at your loved one's funeral. And actually, it's something that I've seen, I don't know, in Brene Brown's work, whether that's in her writing or one of her videos, I can't remember, but in her, she must have done some research or study on what signifies trust in a relationship, and going to someone's funeral was like one of the top, 3 to 5 things that signifies like, I can trust this person. So that's probably the most, like, obviously if the funeral's been and gone, you've missed that boat. But the other thing, well, there's 2 other really important things. They're all important, but is say something. Like, and that's another one, like in my experience, there was the people that said nothing that I remember, and I know like our brain loves to remember the negative
the negative
stuff, but it truly was like the people that I thought I had a relationship or like a trusting, we built up a friendship, we'd spent some time together. It was the people that said nothing that I was just like, and it's not like I'm like looking at my list of friends and ticking them off as they send me like condolence messages or checking in. But yeah, there are like a handful. And I mean, it's, obviously that's small fry in the whole grief experience. But if you're thinking about, you want your friendship or relationship to continue, then that's something that, just say something. It doesn't need to be, words. There are no words that are going to fix anything or make anything better. So it really doesn't matter what words. I think it's more the intention and the way that they're shared with the bereaved person. And if you're awkward about it, just be honest. Like, I've got no idea what the hell to say to you right now. Like, this makes me really awkward, but I'm thinking of you. And it's just as simple as it needs to be.
Yeah, that's so true. And I guess because we get like so wrapped up in our own heads, but if you're like wanting to be there for someone who's grieving, like they're not really they've got so much else on their plate that they're thinking about. They're not going to care if you show up and be awkward.
Yeah.
Like, you're probably overthinking all of your own awkwardness, but in the big scheme of things, you just show up and it doesn't matter.
Yeah. And when you can either show up in person while also respecting their boundaries, obviously, and perhaps capacity for connection and socializing. But I wrote about that in more detail. But yeah, if you're, if you can't be with them in person, then just sending them a message, and you can even say what you want to say, and then say, no need to reply to this message, because you acknowledge that. I mean, even on good days, we struggle to get back to people. So, like if you're becoming just another thing on their to-do list, I think just saying, you acknowledge that they might not want to be on their phone right now, or they don't, because there's something interesting that's kind of tied up with this helping, is that when we help people, it's almost can be coming from a place of seeking validation.
Yeah.
If you're sending condolences to someone with this like need for affirmation or need that you've been valued, then it's probably not a good place to be coming from either.
Yeah, like expecting them to say, thank you so much. You've done the right thing. Good work. Yeah.
But also, like, that has made me so much more compassionate to anything that anyone else is going through. Not necessarily a death, but like, sometimes it's a birth, or sometimes a job loss, or just coming to terms with something new or different in life. Like, so many times I just put in, no need to reply to this message.
Yeah. And I think in the early days, like, probably none of us really knew what we needed. Like, all I distinctly remember is not having like a lot of capacity or energy for like interactions as such. But I think one of the things that stands out is when people just did stuff, like didn't ask, because if they asked like, oh, would you like me to do this, or I could do this, I'd be like, I don't know. I've got no capacity to make a decision, like on the small thing.
Mm-hmm.
So the people that just showed up and was like, I thought you might be hungry, so I bought you this, or some muffins, and you're like, yes, thank you.
Yeah. And that's different. That's definitely something that I talk about as well, is taking the initiative and just being like, what can I do for this person? I kind of liken it to, a lot of friends and peers are having children, and you look at what happens within the family and neighborhood and community on like a personal and community level, but as well as like, like on a, what's the word, like a traditional support level, like Plunkett and parents groups and that kind of thing. You look at what happens around a young family when a baby is born, like things just get done, shit just happens, food just comes up, like, and I know that's the case for, if you've been in a community for a long time, then that might be the case as well when someone dies, but it's kind of still, I think it's still pretty awkward. So like, I think it's important to kind of look at what your strengths are. Like if you're not someone that it feels really uncomfortable around big emotions, then you're not going to be the person that, sits with them and holds their hand or has a cup of tea with them. Like you're going to be the person that maybe offers to take the dog for a walk or take the car in for a warrant, stuff like that. Like look at what your capacity is for helping and offer and take action in that way.
Yeah. So many good points. You mentioned before like the year of firsts, and I think that's like what the grief counsellor that I saw, like she talked about that, and I feel like there was sort of a graph or something that she showed me about like emotion or something or other that is kind of obviously heightened in the first year and then drops off, allegedly. And everyone, like general society, sort of talks about the year of firsts, and it's not that wasn't hard, but it was kind of this weird idea that it was only going to be a year. And it probably is like kind of like false hope almost, that it's gonna, like, it's guaranteed to improve the day you get, like, the next day over a year you're gonna start getting better. And I think I sort of, in my intro for the podcast, sort of talked about my like grief cloud, because that's kind of best way I've got of explaining it, was like over 2 years. And I didn't know if I was going to come out of that or not. Everything was just a bit hazy and foggy, and I was like, could only see a certain amount in front of me. And like since then there's been sort of so many changes, and you slowly get energy back and start figuring out what your new life looks like. But were you the same? Did you sort of have this idea of the year of firsts and then stuff would get better?
Yes, that deeply resonates with me as well. I guess my year of first was it was quite full on, and not in a bad way necessarily. Like 3 months after Dad's death was when my partner Scott and I got together. So like there's this banana,
all bad.
no, like it's just this really, like, reflecting on it, this really strange contradiction or like contrast of being really like still deep in processing grief, but also being with this like excitement of like this new relationship, but also everything that comes in between that as well. Like I'm probably, I'm at my most vulnerable, but also my most open to new experiences, because I realize how, precious life is. But then I'm also probably at my worst, like I'm tired and things will set me off. So yeah, that was it's been a really like interesting. And he's still here, so that's great.
It can't have been too terrifying for him.
And then we haven't spoken about this yet, but within that first year, I won an entry to a 5-day ultra marathon in Jordan in the Wadi Rum Desert. And so
it just still makes me laugh because it's just like, like, I feel like I remember when you told us, you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to Jordan. Not just going to Jordan, I'm going to run. Not just run, I'm going to run for 5 days in the desert. And this is what I'm doing. Like, okay.
So I guess like in the year first, I had that to look forward to and that to kind of prepare for. And while I'd won the entry, I still had to pay for my own flights over there. I thought because I have this really strong connection with France and the French culture and language. And so I thought, oh, well, I'll just, that was tricky too. Like 6 months into this awesome new relationship, and I'm going to spend 3 months on the other side of the world.
Yeah.
So I guess I kind of had this balance of like things that were really, quite, adventurous and expansive, and almost feeling like, not that I was not moving on because I don't like that term, but a sense of kind of, I still have this life that deserves to be lived.
Yeah.
But in kind of extending and reaching towards that, there was still a lot of like grief left. I was still like facing it a lot. Like I was really intentional about giving it space and giving myself space for that. But yeah, definitely the second year went like another layer deeper. And probably harder as well with that was COVID locked the first year. The world of COVID started, so
yeah,
and that came with its own, the whole world's kind of tilted on its axis, and like this whole everyone's a little bit unstable. So.
Like just adds to your existing instability
and uncertainty. But what's really certain and secure anyway? So,
it's fascinating just how like, and I guess it takes strength and energy to be able to hold emotions at each end of the spectrum at once and feel all of those things. And then also trying to like, I guess, because you have to kind of go further inwards and learn about like what triggers you and what you need. And then you're trying to convey that to someone that you've just started a relationship with. And then next minute you're like, bye, I'm off to Jordan and before we finish up, I'd love to just touch briefly on what you're up to at the moment. What does life look like for you? Very different to the start of your story.
Very different. Yeah. We live in beautiful Manapoti on the edge of Fiordland National Park, and it's like just such a treat to be able to call this place home, like getting to look out at the mountains almost every day when they're not covered in cloud. But given how important the outdoors and being in the hills has been in my journey through grief, but also my well-being, it's pretty just so grounding and so special. Like never dreamed about to live so close to mountains and the water. But yeah, I work from home as a grief coach. So I work with bereaved humans, one-on-one mostly at the moment, but I also run a local support group here. We meet up. We have an online group, but also meet up, once a month in person as well. And they're such a beautiful bunch of humans. I mean, it sounds crazy. Like one of them had said, someone said to me, "You're not going to go and hang out with all those sad people, are you?" But like,
wow,
I guess we get this image of what grief support groups look like, from movies or TV or whatever. But and I think this comes, circles back to that conversation we were having about, censoring ourselves for the benefit of others. In a group like that, you're literally with your people, and it's such a relief, so freeing to be able to just say exactly what's going on. And like, how are you getting on? Like, oh, it's been shit, and like, we get it, and it's totally fine.
I think it's amazing that you've somehow reached a point where you're like able to hold that space for other people as well, like still on your own grief journey, but having energy and capacity to give back. Was there sort of a moment or something that happened that made you decide to sort of follow this path?
I think because, like, coming back to what I said about, people need to know this stuff. And so I shared, bits and pieces of my journey. And occasionally people would reach out and be like, this has happened, or, either their personal experience or they want to be able to support someone else who's grieving. And I guess the nudge had been there for a while. I actually did my yin yoga teacher training last year, and that was, well, actually prior to that, I'll try and keep this short, I promise.
It's okay.
Prior to that, had started writing down my story and joined a writing group, and so putting my words and my story into a memoir, and I was focusing on keeping the story, but there are also all these other things that I was finding that I had learned along the way. And I was like, what am I going to do with this? And so I just made notes, parked it, and then did my yin teacher training and learned a whole lot about, quite a bit about holding space, but also how important the body and the nervous system is in our whole conversation about whole being, well-being.
Yeah.
And that really lit the spark for diving more in that direction. And I thought, maybe I'm going to hold space for people grieving through yoga. And I kind of tried that, and then this grief thing was still there. And I was like, no, like I guess I kind of felt like perhaps I wasn't strong enough, or, perhaps I wouldn't be able to balance, my own energy my own energy with this holding space. But if you're supported, and I obviously have the lived experience, and I have some more knowledge and more learning, and I'm continuing to study, that I can do this, and it's important, and it's really, really needed.
Yes, because I love the idea that for people in the future, like me when I was back in Auckland, being like, oh, I probably want to talk to someone, and you like put it into Google or whatever, and a grief coach comes up. Like, I think that is so powerful rather than trying to find somewhere else where your emotions fit in or the right person to hold space for you. But the fact that you are like the perfect person for them and to like help carry them through parts of their journey as well is amazing.
Yeah. And like, I was always really envious of people who like from a young age knew what they're here to do in life, or knew what their purpose was, and I feel like I've really settled into that in the last year or so. Someone described it to me as like, like when a like a hen or like a bird like nestles down into it, like fluffs her feathers and nestles into her nest. Like, I kind of feel that's me now. Like, like I've kind of found my groove, and I'm just I'm happy. I'm really content, and just happy to be helping people, and facing possibly what is like the toughest thing they've ever encountered.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. So how can people find you?
You can find me, probably the best place is on Instagram. I'm at with Hannah Ray on Instagram, or you can perhaps find me in the show notes.
Yeah.
And my website, hannahray.co.
Yes.
Would love to
Perfect.
see you over there.
Yeah, it'll all be in the show notes. And if you go and hang out in Manapuri, you might find Hannah with a dog or two or a bike or who knows what.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining me. It's been just incredible kind of yarning about this with you and delving into some of the darker places that no one often talks about.
Man, it's flowing by. There's so much to say. I'm sure you do too.
We might have to do a part 2. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.